The wind howled through the village of Yumudike, carrying whispers of an approaching storm. The moon, once full and bright, was now swallowed by thick, rolling clouds, leaving the land in eerie darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a baby cried, and an old dog let out a mournful wail, as if sensing the doom that was about to unfold. In the grandest compound of the village, Chief Abadil, the wealthiest man in Yumudike, sat in his massive hut, surrounded by golden artifacts, silk mats, and trays overflowing with food. Roasted yams, steaming bowls of egusi soup, succulent pieces of goat meat. He had more than he could ever eat. The air was rich with the scent of spices and fresh palm wine, yet his heart was as empty as the cold night outside. A sudden knock at the palace gates shattered the silence. Knock, knock, knock. The guards exchanged glances. It was late, too late for visitors. Chief Abadil, lazily chewing on a piece of dried fish, barely looked up. "Who dares disturb my evening feast?" he grumbled, wiping his greasy fingers on his wrapper. The knocking came again, louder this time. One of the guards hurried to the gates and peered outside. Standing in the rain was a frail old man, dressed in tattered rags. His hair was white as freshly pounded fufu, his skin wrinkled with age, and his eyes, deep and knowing, glowed in the dim lantern light. "I seek shelter," the stranger said, his voice barely above a whisper, "and a little food to fill my stomach." The guard hesitated. Chief Abadil was not known for his generosity. In fact, he was infamous for his cold heart. He had the biggest barns, yet the poor starved. He had fields stretching beyond the hills, yet he never shared a single grain of his harvest. The guard sighed and turned back. "My chief, it is a beggar." Abadil snorted. "A beggar? At my gate? Tell him to go and bother those foolish enough to waste their food on the useless. My chief, he looks weak. The rain is heavy, and did I ask for an explanation?" Abadil thundered, slamming his hand on the table. "If he is cold, let him sleep under a tree. If he is hungry, let him eat the sand beneath his feet. This is my house, and I give nothing for free." The guard bowed his head and reluctantly turned back to the stranger. "The chief says—" "I heard him," the old man interrupted, his voice suddenly stronger. "I will take my leave." But just before he turned away, he reached into the folds of his ragged cloak and pulled out a small wooden bowl. It was old, cracked, and looked like something a child would discard. "Give this to your master," the old man said, handing it to the guard. "Tell him it is a gift." The guard, confused but unwilling to anger his chief further, took the bowl and hurried inside. Abadil frowned at the sight of the pitiful object. "What nonsense is this?" he scoffed, turning it over in his hands. But then, the bowl began to glow. A deep, golden light radiated from within, swirling like the morning sun. The room fell into a stunned silence. Even Abadil, for all his arrogance, felt a strange unease crawl up his spine. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the glow vanished. The chief blinked. "A trick," he muttered. "A useless, stupid trick." Annoyed, he tossed the bowl onto a pile of dirty plates and promptly forgot about it. Outside, the storm raged on. The old man, now a mere shadow against the night, disappeared into the darkness. And as the clock struck midnight, a curse was born. The night swallowed Yumudike in thick darkness, the air heavy with the weight of something unseen, something unnatural. It was as if the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting. Inside his grand hut, Chief Abadil slept soundly, oblivious to the shifting fate that loomed over him. His dreams were filled with gold, with the sweet taste of power, with the endless riches that had made him the most feared and respected man in the village. But in the dead of the night, as the last embers in his fire pit flickered out, something strange began to happen. It started with a whisper, a faint, eerie voice that seemed to rise from the very walls of his compound. "Ungrateful one, your time has come." Abadil stirred in his sleep, his face twitching in discomfort. Then the wind picked up. A slow, creeping breeze slipped into the room like a silent intruder, curling around the grand furniture, rustling the silk curtains, flickering the oil lamps. Then crash. A deafening sound filled the air as the massive clay pots stacked in the corner shattered on their own, their contents spilling across the floor. Abadil bolted upright, his heart hammering in his chest. His eyes darted around the room, but there was no one there. Only the sound of the wind, whispering, calling. The greedy shall lose all. A deep shudder ran through his body. He forced himself to breathe, rubbing his hands over his face. It's nothing, he muttered. A dream. A trick of the wind. But then, a scream tore through the night. Loud. Terrified. A woman's wail, raw with panic. It came from outside. Abadil threw on his heavy embroidered robe and stormed out of his hut. The sight before him made his blood run cold. His wives, his guards, his servants, everyone was gathered in the courtyard, their faces frozen in horror. Some clutched their chests, others covered their mouths, unable to speak. What is this nonsense? He roared. Why are you all standing here like frightened goats? Then his eyes followed their trembling fingers. His barns, his great, towering barns, filled with grains, yams, and treasures, were empty, completely empty. Not a single yam, not a single grain of rice, not a single thing remained. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed everything whole. Abadil staggered backward. His mind struggled to make sense of what he was seeing. Where is my food? He bellowed. No one answered. They didn't have to. It wasn't just the barns. His golden chest, the one he kept hidden under his bed, was gone. His cows, his goats, his chickens, all gone. Even the clothes from his storage hut, the expensive fabrics he had imported from distant lands, had vanished into thin air. The chief let out a strangled gasp, his knees buckling beneath him. His world was spinning, his heart pounding furiously against his ribs. Who did this? He roared, his voice shaking. Who dared steal from me? The villagers shifted uneasily, glancing at one another, unsure how to answer. Then, an old woman, one of his oldest servants, stepped forward. Her face was lined with age, her eyes wise with knowledge beyond words. Nobody stole from you, my chief, she said, her voice eerily calm. Your riches have left you, just as you turned away the stranger last night. Everything you own has turned away from you. Abadil felt his chest tighten. His breath came in short, shallow gasps. No, this couldn't be happening. He was the richest man in Yumyadike, the strongest, the greatest. How could he, of all people, be left with nothing? His fingers dug into the earth as the full weight of his loss sank in. He could already hear the whispers among his people, the murmurs of doubt and fear that if a man who had once owned everything now had nothing, what did that make him? And then, in the midst of his trembling realization, he saw it. The small wooden bowl that lay untouched near the entrance of his hut. Where he had tossed it carelessly the night before, was the only thing that remained. That a cold silence settled over the once mighty compound of Chief Abadil. His servants stood still, their faces pale with shock, their eyes darting between the empty barns, the vanished livestock, the missing treasures. Everything that had once made this the grandest household in Yumyadike was gone, swallowed by an unseen force. And at the center of it all, Chief Abadil collapsed to his knees, his rich robes dragging in the dirt. His gold was gone, his food was gone, his power was gone. But the small wooden bowl remained. Sat there, untouched, its cracked surface seeming to mock him, reminding him of the moment he had tossed it aside in arrogance. Abadil's breathing grew ragged. His mind spun. This had to be a trick. Someone had stolen from him in the dead of night. Someone had betrayed him. His lips curled into a snarl. This is witchcraft, he bellowed, his voice hoarse with desperation. Someone has bewitched me. The crowd flinched at the madness in his eyes, but no one spoke. Then, a deep, distant laugh echoed through the compound. It was not the laugh of a villager. It was something else, that a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, that a sound that slithered beneath the skin, chilling the bones. The villagers shivered. Some began muttering silent prayers, while others stepped back, clutching their wrappers tightly around their bodies. Then, boom, the ground shook. The wind howled through the village, kicking up dust, slamming against the walls. And then, a voice, low, ancient, and filled with power, spoke from the air itself. You were warned, Abadil. The chief's breath hitched. His eyes darted wildly, searching for the source of the voice, but there was no one. Just the swirling wind, the trembling villagers, and that terrible, unseen presence. The voice continued, calm yet commanding. You had everything, yet you gave nothing. You were given a chance, yet you turned kindness away. Now, you shall reap what you have sown. Abadil's skin crawled with terror. He staggered to his feet. Who are you? He gasped. Show yourself. The wind only grew stronger, circling around him like an angry spirit. I was a beggar at your gates. The voice whispered, though it was no longer just one voice. It was many, layered upon each other, like echoes from another world. Abadil's blood ran cold. The old man, the stranger from the night before. This was his doing, his hands clenched into fists, his mind racing. No, he was a chief, a man of wealth and wisdom. He would not be reduced to this shaking, powerless creature. He would fix this. He turned abruptly to the villagers. You all stand here like fools, he barked, his voice carrying the last traces of his old authority. Search the village. Find that wretched beggar. Bring him to me at once. But the villagers hesitated. One moved. One of the elders, a frail, wrinkled man named Pa Anazi, finally stepped forward, shaking his head slowly. My chief, he said gravely. No one saw the old man after he left last night. And after what has happened, do you truly believe he was just a man? A heavy silence fell. The wind stopped. The air grew still. For the first time in his life, Chief Abadil felt small. That a terrible, unshakable realization crept over him like a dark shadow. The beggar had never been a man, and Abadil had sealed his own fate. His knees weakened. He turned, staring once more at the wooden bowl, now glowing faintly in the dim morning light. That it was the only thing left, the only thing that had not abandoned him. His shaking fingers reached for it, but the moment he touched it, a wave of dizziness hit him. The world spun. The chief let out a strangled cry as his body collapsed onto the dusty ground. His vision darkened. The last thing he heard before he lost consciousness was the distant, eerie sound of laughter, echoing from the shadows. And then, everything went black. Chief Abadil's world was a whirling abyss of darkness. Somewhere in the vast emptiness, he could hear muffled voices, distant and fading, as though he were trapped beneath the surface of a river, drowning in his own misfortune. Then, just as suddenly as it came, the darkness shattered. With a sharp gasp, Abadil's eyes flew open. He was lying in the middle of his compound, sprawled out in the dust like a common beggar. A faint ringing filled his ears, and for a moment he couldn't move. Then, a familiar sound reached him. Whispers. They slithered through the air like shadows, creeping into his ears. The mighty have fallen. The great chief is no longer great. Perhaps the gods have judged him. Abadil's stomach twisted as the realization struck him. They were talking about him. With effort, he pushed himself up, his limbs weak and trembling. But as he did, something even more horrifying sent a chill racing down his spine. The villagers had gathered in a wide circle around him, staring not with reverence, but with something far worse, pity. Gone was the fear in their eyes, the respect that once laced their voices when they spoke his name. In its place was something that made his blood run cold. Mockery, disdain, amusement. Even his robes have abandoned him. Someone whispered. That Abadil's brows furrowed in confusion until he glanced down at himself. His heart nearly stopped. His luxurious chieftain robes, once made of the finest imported silk, embroidered with gold, were gone. In their place was a tattered, dirty cloth barely clinging to his body, the kind worn by the lowest beggars in the village. A ragged breath escaped his lips. His fingers dug into the dirt, his mind reeling. This could not be real. It had to be a nightmare. He scrambled to his feet, his hands shaking. What is happening? He bellowed, his voice breaking with panic. Where are my clothes? Where's my wealth? But no one answered. No one even moved. Pa Anazi, the village elder, stepped forward. His old eyes were filled with something close to sadness, but there was no sympathy in his voice. My chief, he said slowly, it seems your riches were never truly yours to keep. The words pierced through Abadil like a dagger. Lies, he spat, his face twisting with anger. I built this wealth with my own hands. I ruled this village with my own power. Everything I owned. And yet, now you have nothing. The voice that interrupted him did not belong to Pa Anazi. It came from behind him. From the shadows of the compound's entrance, Abadil's blood turned to ice. Slowly, he turned. There, standing just beyond the light of the rising sun, was the beggar. Except, he was no longer a beggar. The old man's ragged clothes were gone. replaced by a flowing white robe that shimmered faintly, as though woven from moonlight itself. His once bent posture was now tall and regal, his eyes no longer clouded by age, but burning with something ancient and powerful. The villagers gasped. Some fell to their knees. Others backed away, whispering in fear. But Abadil froze. His mouth went dry, his chest tightened, and for the first time in his life, true terror gripped him. Because now, he understood. This was no ordinary man. This was no beggar. This was something far greater, something not of this world. The figure took a slow step forward, and as he did, the very air trembled. I came to you as a beggar, the figure said, his voice no longer frail, but deep, commanding, like the rumbling of the earth itself. I knocked on your gates, cold and hungry, seeking only a morsel of your wealth, a simple kindness. But you, his gaze bored into Abadil, and the chief felt as if his very soul was being laid bare. You mocked me. You laughed at me. And worse, you turned me away. Abadil opened his mouth, to beg, to explain, to do something, but no sound came. You were given everything, yet your heart remained empty, the figure continued. And so, the gods have made you empty in return. Abadil staggered backward. No, no, please, he rasped, his chest heaving. I did not know. If I had known you were, the figure's gaze sharpened. If I had been an ordinary man, would you have treated me any differently? The question struck Abadil like a slap. He had no answer. The silence stretched between them, heavy as stone. Finally, the figure sighed. Your punishment is just, Abadil. You will walk this earth as the very thing you once despised, a man with nothing. A low murmur ran through the villagers. The greatest chief in Yumudike, reduced to a beggar. Abadil's knees buckled. His body shook with despair. He had lost everything. Not just his riches, not just his power, but his place in the world. And the worst part, he had done it to himself. The figure turned to leave, his form already fading like mist in the morning sun. But just before he vanished completely, he spoke one final time. True wealth is found not in gold, but in the kindness we give to others. Then, he was gone. The wind died down, the sun fully rose, but Chief Abadil remained where he was, kneeling in the dust, the weight of his greed, his arrogance, his mistakes crushing him completely. The villagers slowly dispersed, leaving him alone. And for the first time in his life, Chief Abadil understood hunger, he understood cold, he understood what it meant to be powerless. But whether he would ever learn to be kind, only time would tell. Chief Abadil had known power, he had known wealth, known glory, known the way a single flick of his hand could make men bow before him. But now, he knew humiliation. Now, he knew hunger. The sun blazed mercilessly overhead, casting cruel shadows as Abadil staggered through the dusty streets of Yumudike. His bare feet burned against the scorching ground, but he had long since stopped noticing the pain. Pain, after all, was nothing compared to shame. Villagers passed by him without so much as a second glance. Some whispered, some sneered, some even laughed. He recognized them. Oh, how he recognized them! These were the very people who had once trembled at his voice, who had rushed to serve him, who had lowered their eyes when he walked past. And now, they treated him as if he were nothing, a nobody, a beggar that he had begged. The thought alone made his stomach twist in horror. Chief Abadil, the once mighty ruler of Yumudike, reduced to pleading for scraps, his hand outstretched in the same desperate manner as the old beggar he had once mocked. And the worst part, the people he had once turned away so easily, they did the same to him. Please, just a little food, he had murmured to a woman selling roasted plantains by the roadside that morning. The woman, a stout widow who had once cowered before him, had simply snorted and turned her back. Go and beg from the gods you once worshipped, she had spat over her shoulder. Perhaps they will feed you. The sting of it had nearly broken him. Nearly. But the truth was, the worst was yet to come. Days turned into weeks, and still, Abadil wandered the streets, searching, hoping, praying for someone to show him even the smallest kindness. But no one did. Not the traders who once paid him tribute. Not the elders who once sought his counsel. Not even the men and women who once feared his wrath that he had ruled them with an iron fist, never once sparing a thought for the poor, the weak, the needy, and now the world had flipped on its head. Now he was the one at the mercy of others. Now he was the one learning what it meant to be helpless. One evening, as the sky burned with the last light of the setting sun, Abadil sat beneath a large udala tree in the center of the village, his back hunched, his body weak. His once strong frame had withered, his rich dark skin now dull and cracked from the sun. His stomach gnawed at him like a wild animal, yet he had no strength left to search for food. What was the point? Even if he asked, no one would give. Even if he pleaded, they would turn him away, the same way he had turned away the old man. His throat tightened at the memory, the beggar or the spirit, rather that he had been so blind, so foolish, so cruel that if only he had known. A pebble struck his arm. His head snapped up just in time to see a small boy grinning mischievously a few feet away. Before Abadil could react, another stone followed, this time hitting him squarely in the chest. Laughter erupted from a small group of children gathered a few paces away. "See the former chief," one of them jeered. "See how he sits like a common dog." "Throw another one," another child shouted. Abadil flinched as a third pebble hit his shoulder. The deep, burning humiliation flared in his chest. Once, children feared him. Once, their parents had warned them to never even speak his name too loudly. And now, they pelted him with stones like a worthless stray that he wanted to roar, to stand up, to remind them who he was. But who was he? Really, a weak, starving man, a fallen leader, a beggar. He had nothing to no powered, no home, no one to call his own. Just the cold night ahead and the emptiness inside him. That night, Abadil lay beneath the udala tree, staring up at the sky, watching as the stars blinked in the vast, endless darkness. He had never noticed how beautiful they were before, how bright they shone, despite the emptiness around them. For the first time since his fall, he thought about something other than himself. What had that old man, no, the spirit, said to him before vanishing? True wealth is found not in gold, but in the kindness we give to others. Abadil had spent his whole life gathering riches, building his power, feeding his greed, but what had it given him in the end? Nothing. Nothing but loneliness, nothing but a ruined name, nothing but an empty heart. The realization hit him with the force of a mighty wind. He had spent his entire life taking from others. Perhaps it was time he gave something back. That a new resolve settled in his chest. It would not be easy. He would have to earn the forgiveness of those he had wronged. That he would have to learn humility, to embrace the life he once despised. But maybe, just maybe, he could change. And for the first time since he had lost everything, Abadil felt something he had not felt in a long time: hope. The morning came with a slow, golden light that spread across the village, warming the land, stirring the people of Yumudike from their sleep. But for Abadil, sleep had been a distant stranger. He had spent the night awake beneath the udala tree, his mind a battlefield of thoughts, regrets, and something new: determination. For the first time since his fall, he had made a decision. He would not die in disgrace. He would change. But change, he soon realized, was easier said than done. Abadil rose with the first light, his joints stiff, his stomach aching from hunger. His first lesson in humility came almost immediately. He had nothing, no home, no food, no wealth, no power. If he was to survive, if he was to prove himself worthy of a second chance, he had to do what he had never done before. That he had to work. The mere thought sent a deep sting of shame through his chest. He had once been a man whose orders moved the entire village, and now he had to ask for work like a common laborer. But there was no other way, and so he forced himself forward, one slow, painful step at a time. His first stop was the marketplace, the heart of Yumudike, where traders and farmers gathered each morning to sell their goods. The air was thick with the scent of roasted yam, dried fish, and fresh palm oil. Women balanced baskets on their heads, calling out their prices. Young boys ran between stalls, carrying loads for their masters. The hum of voices, the clatter of coins, the laughter of bargaining. It was the sound of life. Once, Abadil had walked through this same market like a king. Now, he walked like a ghost, unnoticed, unwanted, until he stopped before a familiar face. "Good morning, Mama Ifioma." The old woman selling roasted corn barely spared him a glance. She was one of many he had turned away in his time of power. She had once come to his palace, pleading for help when her husband died, leaving her with 4 children to feed. And he had dismissed her without a second thought. She had never forgotten. Now, she looked at him as one might look at a stray dog lurking too close to their food. "What do you want, Abadil?" she asked, her voice sharp. He swallowed the shame burning in his throat. He hesitated, then forced the words out. "I want to work." Silence. Then laughter. Not just from Mama Ifioma, but from the other market women who had overheard. "Did you hear that?" One of them cackled. "The mighty chief wants to work. Maybe he should sit under the sun and command the corn to roast itself." Another added, sending ripples of laughter through the crowd. Abadil felt his skin burn, not from the sun, but from humiliation. This was harder than he had thought. But he did not turn away. Instead, he did what no one expected. He knelt. The laughter died instantly. "I know I was cruel," he said, his voice raw. "I know I turned you away when you needed me. And now, the gods have humbled me." His forehead touched the dust. A chief, once feared, once obeyed, bowing before a common woman. Gasps echoed around him. "I have no riches left," Abadil continued. "No throne, no servants. I am only a man who has done wrong and seeks to make things right." He raised his head, locking eyes with Mama Ifioma. "If you cannot forgive me, I understand. But please, let me work. Even if it is only to sweep the dust from your feet." Silence stretched between them. Then, a deep sigh. Mama Ifioma studied him for a long moment, then tossed a small broom at his feet. "Start with sweeping the front of my stall," she muttered, turning away. Abadil picked up the broom with trembling hands. And so, it began. The days that followed were the hardest of his life. Abadil worked from morning until night, doing tasks he had never imagined himself doing. Sweeping the market, carrying heavy loads, cleaning dirt-stained mats, even washing the feet of elders. The same people who had once bowed before him now gave him orders. And he obeyed without complaint. At first, they mocked him. Children still threw stones. Men still sneered. Women still whispered behind their palms. But Abadil did not stop. For every scornful look, he bowed his head. For every cruel word, he worked harder, and slowly, ever so slowly, something began to change. The market women, who had once laughed at him, now left small portions of food for him after a long day's work. The elders, who had once shaken their heads in disgust, now watched him with something almost like approval. And one evening, as he was finishing his sweeping, Mama Ifioma beckoned him. Closer, he stepped forward, expecting another task. Instead, she held out a bowl of pounded yam and egusi soup. "Eat," she said simply. Abadil's throat tightened, not from shame this time, but from gratitude. As he took the bowl, he felt something he had not felt in years. Warmth, kindness, and for the first time since his fall, he understood. This was the true wealth he had been blind to all along. But his journey was not over yet, for the gods were still watching, and the final test was coming. Days turned into weeks, and Abadil grew accustomed to the labor of common folk. His hands, once soft and accustomed to rings of gold, were now calloused. His feet, once carried by fine sandals, were hardened by the dust of Yumudike's roads. The man who had once ruled with arrogance now bowed in humility. But though his actions had changed, the true test of his transformation had yet to come. One fateful evening, as Abadil swept the marketplace at dusk, Dike, the wealthiest merchant in Yumudike, approached with slow, deliberate steps. Dike had once envied Abadil's position. Now, he found amusement in his downfall. "So, the mighty chief has become a common sweeper," Dike said, his voice dripping with mockery. Abadil did not respond. He simply continued his work. Dike smirked. "Tell me, Abadil, if you are truly a changed man, would you prove it?" Abadil paused, his hands tightening around the broom. "If it is within my power, I will," he said quietly. Dike folded his arms. "Good. Then fetch water for me, from the farthest well." A gasp rippled through the market. The farthest well lay deep beyond the village, past the fields, past the river, past even the land where wild beasts roamed. The journey was not just long, it was treacherous. And Dike, he had many servants who could have fetched the water. This was not a task, it was a humiliation. A cruel test to see if Abadil's humility was real or just another act. The crowd waited, murmuring among themselves. Would he accept this impossible task? Would he refuse and reveal that pride still lurked in his heart? Without a word, Abadil picked up the clay pot and began the journey. The sky darkened as Abadil walked, the cool evening breeze whispering through the tall grasses. His stomach ached with hunger, his limbs weary from days of labor. Yet, he pressed on. He crossed the farmlands, where farmers packing up for the day paused to watch him go. He passed the river, where children had once thrown stones at him, their laughter now quiet as they watched him trudge forward. The journey stretched endlessly, and with every step, doubt gnawed at him. Why am I doing this? Dyke is testing me. He wants me to suffer. What if this is all for nothing? But then, he remembered the voices of the people who had once cried for help, the very people he had turned away in his time of power. He remembered Mama Ifeoma's kindness, the silent forgiveness in the eyes of those who had once feared him. I was cruel. Now I must learn what it means to serve. With renewed determination, he reached the farthest well, its stone walls ancient and weathered. He drew up the water carefully, lifting the heavy pot onto his shoulder, and that was when he heard it, the cry. Faint, but unmistakable. Abadil turned, scanning the trees. Then he saw it, a young boy, no older than 10, slumped beneath a twisted tree. His ankle was swollen, his face streaked with tears. Abadil set the pot down and rushed to his side. What happened? He asked. The boy winced. I was gathering firewood. I fell, and I cannot walk. Abadil glanced at the heavy pot of water. He had a choice. He could complete his task and return triumphant, proving his humility to Dyke and the entire village, or he could abandon his pride entirely and do what was truly right. The decision was clear. Without hesitation, Abadil lifted the boy onto his back, securing him carefully before beginning the long journey home. The weight of the child slowed him. The journey back was twice as long, the road twice as cruel. Every step was agony. His muscles screamed, his vision blurred with exhaustion. When he finally reached the outskirts of Yumudike, the marketplace was full. News of his journey had spread, and the entire village had gathered, waiting to see if he would succeed or fail. Dyke stood at the front, arms crossed, smirking. Where is the water? Abadil's legs trembled as he gently set the boy down before him. I do not have the water, Abadil admitted, his voice hoarse. But I have something more valuable. Dyke scoffed. More valuable than what I asked for. Abadil nodded and gestured to the boy, who clung to his swollen ankle. This child was injured. He could not walk. I had to make a choice. Water will always be here, but a life, once lost, cannot be returned. Silence. Then, a single, slow clap. Mama Ifeoma stepped forward, nodding in approval. He has learned, she said. Point one by one, others joined in. The elders, the traders, the same people who had once despised him. Even those who had mocked him now nodded in quiet agreement. That Dyke's smirk faltered. He had expected Abadil to fail. Instead, the former chief had proven something greater. The gods had been watching, and they were pleased. That night, as Abadil sat beneath the Udala tree, a figure emerged from the shadows, the stranger, the same mysterious traveler who had once arrived in Yumudike, setting this path in motion. You have done well, the stranger said, his voice like the rustling of leaves. Abadil looked up. Have I truly changed? The stranger nodded. You have learned humility. You have learned kindness. And most importantly, you have learned sacrifice. Then, from his robes, the stranger pulled out a single cowrie shell and placed it in Abadil's hands. This is the true wealth you once sought, the stranger said. Not gold, not power, but a heart that understands what is truly valuable. Abadil turned the shell over in his fingers. It was simple, unremarkable, and yet, he felt its weight. He looked up, ready to ask the stranger one final question. But the stranger was gone. Abadil never returned to power. He did not reclaim his title. He did not seek revenge on those who had laughed at him. Instead, he became something greater. He became a man of the people. He labored alongside them, shared their burdens, listened to their struggles. He rebuilt his life, not with riches, but with service, and the people of Yumudike, who had once feared his wrath, came to respect his wisdom. They told his story to their children, and when, many years later, Abadil finally closed his eyes for the last time. He was not remembered as the cruel chief who fell, but as the man who rose again, the man who learned the true meaning of wealth, the man who had been gifted a second chance. And from that day forward, in every home in Yumudike, it was said, a kind heart is worth more than a kingdom of gold.